Live from the Mexican-U.S. border near Juarez is CBN's Chuck Holton, and a lot going on down there, Chuck. And why don't you just start off and tell us what you're seeing, what you're looking for down there, and what you found?
Well, I'll tell you, they say that there are now something like 75 to 80,000 migrants in this city alone in Juarez that are waiting to get across into the United States. I'm at a center for immigration, which is kind of like a homeless shelter, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
for these migrants that's run by the Catholic Church here in Juarez. There are several of these around the city, and they're seeing a drastic increase over the last couple of weeks since the inauguration of migrants coming in from Honduras and Cuba, Brazil, Guatemala, places like that.
Mm-hmm. And are they able to directly attribute that? I mean, I've read some reports that because of the sort of the signals that the Biden administration has sent, talking about legalizing 11 million people, et cetera, et cetera. Is there like a hope that's sort of spreading there that you've heard about, that people are like, wow, we just think we're going to get some leniency here, so let's go ahead to the border?
Yeah, that's exactly what's happening. Every one of the migrants that we've talked to says, well, Biden told us we had to get here within the first 100 days. I'm not
Mm-hmm.
sure where they got that exactly, but they believe that they need to hurry up and get in line to get in under the Biden administration. When in reality, the Border Patrol agents that we've spoken with have said, although they expect changes to come down from the Biden administration, they have not seen many of those changes yet. And because of that, they're not deporting. There's a moratorium on deportations, but they are removing people. So there's a difference between deportation and removal. And so what that means is that the Border Patrol is resorting to immediate removal rather than letting people go through the process of applying for asylum and then being denied asylum and then being deported. So what that means is that these migrants don't even get the chance to apply for asylum. Instead, they get picked up by the Border Patrol and they are immediately taken back to Mexico if they speak Spanish. If they do not speak Spanish, they are held in detention until they get enough of them, and then they put them on an airplane and fly them back to their country of origin. It's called an immediate removal rather than a deportation. So, in that sense, it's actually worse for these migrants than it was before Biden got in. Although, like I said, the Border Patrol expects that to change soon as the Biden administration works through the process of changing the policies officially for migrant detentions and things like that.
Yeah, because obviously there was a lot of debate, Chuck, over the whole separating families at the border and whatnot, and that was something that has said to have been going on since the Obama administration, and then when it happened in the Trump administration, it became an even bigger issue. And so, is that sort of action being prevented because of this step you're talking about, the immediate deportation or the removal or whatever they're calling it?
Well, yes and no. I mean, in reality, the family separation issue is much worse when people are encouraged to come to the United States for a better life, so to speak, for a
Hmm.
better job. What we see is husbands leaving their wives and families in Guatemala or Honduras and moving up into the United States to get a better job with the promise that as soon as I get established, I'll send for you and I'll bring you up with me. In reality, what we see is that these guys are then, if they apply for asylum, it's going to take 2 to 3 years for them to have an asylum hearing, and they're not allowed to leave in that time, and so they're not allowed to see their families and go back
Hmm.
home and visit their families, and so many of them end up with a girlfriend and then a new baby and then a new family in the United States. And I've been to Guatemala and have talked to those wives and children who say, after a year or two, the money from my husband dried up and we don't hear from him anymore because he has a new family in the United States. So that's the real family separation issue, is actually allowing these guys to apply for asylum like that. But the immediate removal does, in a way, stop the family separation inside the United States, because when these migrants show up, they immediately get put back on a bus and driven back to Mexico and dropped off. the Remain in Mexico policy that the Trump administration had in place, you're seeing the results of that behind me. Families together waiting in Mexico for their asylum hearing rather than the husband going into the U.S. and applying for asylum and being gone, like I said, for sometimes years.
Yeah.
So there are here at this migrant center behind me. This is an open center. It's not a detention facility. They can come and go. So right now the men are mostly out looking for jobs around Juarez, and the women are here with the children, taking care of them, watching over them during the day.
Chuck, are you seeing any of the? I remember, a few years ago we had the huge migrant caravans that showed up with thousands of people in them, and they were organized. There was some controversy over who organized them, where there were forces sort of telling them and organizing, saying, "Go, go, go! Now's your chance." Are you seeing any of that, or is this more? Does it feel more like a general sort of we're hearing what Biden's saying, and it's just kind of like people are playing telephone tag, and it's like, oh, well, now's our chance. Or does it feel more organized? Or do you have any idea?
So obviously we saw a lot of those happen during the Trump administration, but it really dropped off when we were able to establish the Remain in Mexico policy, because these guys don't plan on coming up here, leaving their homes in Guatemala and living in Mexico for 3 years while they wait for an
Yeah.
asylum hearing in the States. They were coming in these big caravans because they were able to come directly into the U.S., apply for asylum, get given a court date 3 years from now, and then be set free. And they could just go on, drive an Uber or whatever, and they were making good money in the United States, still there illegally waiting for their asylum hearing. But when we put in place the Remain in Mexico policy, now they've got to stay here. There's not near as much economic opportunity here in Mexico, and they don't want to do that. So that really put a stop to the caravans for the last couple of years. Now we've seen just recently in the last couple of weeks a large caravan that started in Honduras, got up to about 9,000 people, and then was broken up in Guatemala, mostly because the Guatemalan government and the Mexican government don't want these caravans moving through their countries, because now they have to stay there and they create a big drain on the resources of Mexico and Guatemala. So last night, for example, we went down to, there's a place where they stopped building the border wall. So there's a big gap in the border fence just
Mm-hmm.
outside of El Paso. And that's a place where migrants typically can literally just walk right across. There's no fence at all. But when we got down there to see that, this is about 9 o'clock last night, there were Mexican federal police, National Guard, and immigration authorities waiting at that gap. And while we were there talking to them, a group of migrants came through and was picked up by the Mexican authorities and put on registered, put on a bus, and taken back into Juarez, not allowed to cross into the United States. We talked to the Mexican officials about that, and they said we're still operating under the Trump policy, and we had deals with Mexico where they would get trade concessions if they helped to stop the illegal migration, and they are still operating under those policies. So again, those may change very shortly as the Biden administration works out the details, but so far they have not changed, and the Mexicans are working hard to stop the illegal migration. They can't stop it all, but they are making a dent.
Well, and I would assume that Mexico, the officials there probably want, as you said, it's a strain on them to have them staying there, and obviously it's for the reasons you mentioned, it benefits America to not have to deal with that the way that we had been previously. So I would assume that the Biden administration, that Mexico would be pushing for that. And this B-roll here we got Chuck going is these are protests of people demanding Biden take action, and I would assume that's what they're all pushing for. And I guess we'll see what Biden does with that.
Like I said, there's 75 to 80,000 migrants here in Juarez waiting for this moment. And what we've seen at the border, I just crossed the border on foot an hour ago, and they have massive barbed wire barricades put up in the middle of the border bridge that spans between Mexico and the United States. And that's because they've seen a bunch of bonsai charges, where 100 migrants will get together and charge the border fence and try to get across illegally.
Hmm.
And that's a big issue. These guys expect that Biden will allow them in and let them just move freely into the United States, and they expect to get amnesty and be given citizenship and all the concomitant benefits, welfare, and that sort of thing that come with it. They know the system. You talk to these migrants from Honduras, they know the system better than most Americans do, and they know how to game the system, and they know how to play that game and get the maximum amount of money from the U.S. taxpayer when they get into the United States.
Hmm. You mentioned, Chuck, real quick. I know you got to get going here, but what you just said, you walked in on foot. Going, what is that like for those of us who have never just tried to hop on over into Mexico on foot? What does that entail, and is it easy? Is it a process, or what's the situation there?
It's actually surprisingly easy, especially now during the COVID crisis. I thought that it would be shut down completely because of COVID, but it's not. From the United States, you walk up to the border bridge, you pay 50 cents to the Mexican authorities and walk right across the bridge. You get checked, your bag checked by the customs officials. Perhaps they might just wave you through and you're in. That's it. Now, getting back into the United States is a little bit more difficult. And there are lots of COVID positive people waiting at the border, begging for entry into the United States. If they have any method of getting in, like a green card or anything like that, work in the United States, a permit or anything, if they get COVID, they immediately go to the border and go into the United States. From here, I'll be going to the hospital here in Juarez because I'm told that the hospitals here are collapsing under the weight of so many COVID patients that the first responders, nurses, and doctors are getting sick and unable to care for all of the COVID patients, and that's creating a really big burden on the ambulance services in El Paso and on the hospitals there as they care for lots and lots of COVID patients coming in from Mexico.
Yeah, I don't think they're, from what I've heard, they're not. I mean, what do you see people wearing masks, or I would assume that's a secondary concern for especially people like trying to flee poverty and get into America. I mean, maybe they're not. Are you seeing people wearing masks, or do they,
Yeah,
or do they not?
most people here in Mexico are wearing masks. I think they're pretty scared about this because if you do get COVID here, there's not a lot of help for you when it comes to healthcare. So people are taking it upon themselves to mask up and to, matter of fact, they won't let me into this migrant center. I've been in there before, but this time they won't let me in at all because they're too concerned about COVID. And so we have to talk to people from outside the fence.
Wow.
So they are worried specifically because they know if you get sick here, medical care is really iffy, and that's a problem.
All right, Chuck. Well, stay safe down there. Thanks for the report, and we will be showing you more of Chuck's reporting here on the ground in Mexico as we take a look at this immigration situation, which many anticipate to increase, given, as we talked about, the language from the incoming Biden administration. So, Chuck, stay safe. Thanks again.
All right, thank you. We'll see you.